Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're watching us from. This is today's church. Today's church. And in today's episode, we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to delve into the arena of politics to ask a question. What is that question? The question is, should a Christian participate in protests? Should a Christian participate? Should a genuine Christian participate in protests? Now, by the way, what is protest? A protest is an active expression of disagreement with an idea or an action. A protest is an active disagreement, expression of disagreement with an idea or an action. Now, of course, you know that protests are different from riots. Riot is a noisy, violent renunciation of peace by a group of people. So we are not talking of riots today. We are talking about peaceful protests. And the question is, should a Christian actually engage in peaceful protests? Why is this question germane at this point in time? Because a group of people came up to say that on August 1 down to August 10th, there shall be peaceful protests around this country to protest hunger, to protest inflation, to protest depravity of government, to protest a very bad economy. And Christians are caught in a tango, asking themselves, should they participate? They are facing the same economic crisis that others are facing. They are passing through the same challenges of insecurity, food inflation, and all that. So they are asking, in view of our faith, should we participate in that? Now, first and foremost, we've got to understand, if we really look at that definition properly, an active expression of disagreement over an idea or an action, you will see that there are protests in the Bible. I'll give examples. Number one, in Exodus chapter 32, when Moses came down from the temple, from the mountain, and came down and saw the children of Israel worshiping and dancing the golden calf that Aaron had made for them. The Bible said he screamed, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And the tribe of Levi came to him, and he said, "Move into the crowd, slay every man his neighbor." Now, what was that? That was a protest. That was a violent protest, actually. The Bible says 3,000 people were killed that very day. 3,000. You can imagine a protest in which 3,000 people are killed. To be a massacre. They will call it a genocide. But that's exactly what Moses instigated. Now, we are not saying whether he was right. We are not saying whether he was doing that for God. That's not the point. The point is, was that a protest? Yes, it was a protest. It was a protest against idolatry. It was a protest against, rising up to play before other gods. Number two, in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, we see the three Hebrew children. They said to the king, "We are not careful to answer you in this matter, O King Nebuchadnezzar. If it be so, our God is able to deliver us. But even if he chooses not to deliver us, we will not bow to your golden image." Now, the issue is very clear. There was a law signed by the emperor himself, sealed with a seal that cannot be revoked. Now, the law says, once you hear the sound of the trumpet, the cymbals, and all that, you fall down and worship the image of the king. And then Nebuchadnezzar, vain as he was, bought into the idea of his advisors, and he did that. Now, there was a law. But some three Hebrew children said, "We will not obey this law." What was it? That was a protest. They said, "We will not follow this law." What was it? That's a protest. And they were thrown into the fiery furnace, heated 7 times, to suit the ego of the king. But they had protested. So there was a protest against bowing down to a golden image of an emperor, against the law. There was a protest against the law of the land, the law of the emperor of the land. So that's number two. Number three, when we come down to the scriptures in New Testament, we find in Matthew chapter 21 and John chapter 2 that Jesus instigated a protest. How? The Bible said he came down to the temple and he saw people who were doing a lot of merchandise in the temple. He protested. He refused. He rejected it. In fact, he took a cord, wiped people, pursued them away from that place, overthrew their tables, and said, "This is supposed to be a house of prayer, a house of worship, but you have turned it into a den of mammons, a den of devils." That was a protest. So in a sense, we can say that Jesus instigated a protest. We can also say that Jesus was a victim of protests. How do you know that? We find that when he was being tried, some people were shouting. And they were shouting because they were instigated by the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees. They were instigated to shout, crucify him, crucify him. The Bible said it was a tumult, it was a crowd. It was not a one-person demonstration. It was a crowd that shouted, this man must be crucified. This man must be crucified. So in that sense, he also became a victim of protests. Paul, a chief apostle, was also a victim of protests. We find out in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 5. Paul writes and said he had been involved with, he had been on the receiving end of protests. And then we find that in Acts chapter 17, verse 5, there were a clear case of protest against Paul. How? He was in the house of Jason while ministering to the whole of Asia. And some vain persons moved with envy came up and began to attack. So he had to be hidden. He had to hide. On the advice of people, he had to hide. Then in Acts chapter 19, we find Demetrius, a goldsmith, stirring up the town against Paul in the land of Ephesus. Why? Because of envy. Why? Because the source of their livelihood was gone. Why? Paul was preaching that those gods they were making had no power, had no redemptive power at any level. And that became a problem for him. So Demetrius stirred up a crowd against Paul. In Acts chapter 21, we find that Paul was on the receiving end of another protest. Why? Some Jews, vain men, began to congregate and to chorus the fact that Paul was bringing into the temple people who were not Jews. They saw him with Timothy and a few others, and so they began to riot. And in fact, Paul was almost killed, if not that the government officials raced down and rescued him from the hands of his killers. So we find that there are protests in the Bible. We have given an example with Moses. We've given an example with the 3 Hebrew children. We've given an example with Christ. We've given an example with Paul. So protests are in the Bible. America would not have become a country if not for protests. It was given birth to on a plethora of protests. So when you talk of America today, you talk of protests. Number 2, Martin Luther protested against the Roman Catholic beliefs and system of worship. He rebelled. He posted 95 theses and pasted it at the wall of Wittenberg in Germany. He became a rebel. In fact, that movement was called Protestant movement, coined from the word protest. Protestant, protest. Number 3, we find that the Montgomery bus protest, where a black woman refused to stand up for a white, and then blacks had to rally around her and make a statement, make a serious statement, which was one of the things that catapulted and coalesced into the civil rights movement in America. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was so strong and so convincing that at the end of his life, he must have felt fulfilled with the collapse of apartheid. We talk of the Aba Women Riot in 1920s and 30s in Nigeria, where women refused to be taxed like their husbands were being taxed. We talk of the NSAS protests that happened in Nigeria a few years ago. Before then, there was the 2012 protest against subsidy removal by the government of President Jonathan. So there have been protests in contemporary history. Let no man deceive you. There have been protests, and there will yet be more protests. In UK, 2 years ago, between 2 years ago and last year, there are close to 50 protests of different types and different times. So there are protests, and there are always going to be protests. Then we can't also forget the George Floyd protest, the Black Lives Matter protest in US, which happened a few years ago, I think about 4 years ago. Now, the question we need to ask is, what are the characteristics of a protest? Number 1, peaceful protests can often degenerate into violent conduct, violent riots. For instance, the Black Lives Matter started as a peaceful thing. Then, before you know it, it got hijacked and it became anti-social, anti-family, anti-Christian. And they were killing and destroying properties, and all sorts of things were happening. The same thing with the EndSARS protests. Some people came in to scatter the place using thugs, using uniformed men. People were killed, and before you know it, there were issues here and there. So peaceful protests can often lead into violent conduct. Number two, for every protest, there's an instigator. For every protest, there's an instigator. There are people who are the masterminds of the protest. Whether they are faceless or they have a face is a different matter, but there are always instigators. Number three, you may not always know the intention of the instigator, of a protest. For instance, I remember when we were in school, there was a time they went to burn the police post in the university. And then some of us were angry because they said the police people were killing our students and all that. So from Freedom Square, we marched down to go and rescue our students that were held back in the police post. Before we got there, we saw that the place was already burning more than 1 hour earlier. So I began to ask personally, how could that be that we are just going now and the place has been burning already? How? Does this send a message? Yes, it does. It shows that there were people who had masterminded the protests, who were trying to use the student body as a camouflage for what they were doing already. So sometimes you may not actually know the intentions of the instigator of the protest. Number three, protests can often turn bloody. It can often turn bloody. We've explained that. So those who expect to benefit from the protests often use inflammatory language, very emotion-laden language, to stir up the emotion of the crowd, to make them to react immediately, to get them to act without reasoning. That's usually what happens. And finally, every protest is based on anger, either anger against the wrongful use of force, or anger against the ineptitude of government, or anger against something. And there's always anger, there's always hatred, there's always pent-up bitterness that stimulates and fuels every protest. Protests are born by anger. And we come to the crux of this matter. August 1 to August 10th is slated for protest. And the question is, why this protest? This protest is occasioned by hunger. People are hungry. The government is doing so little to make sure that this hunger is taken care of. Insecurity is everywhere. People are being kidnapped every day. People are being killed every day in their homes, in their farms, in their workplaces, on the road. Insecurity is a major problem. In fact, insecurity had added to the issue of agricultural produce, because North Central states that used to provide us with food all over this country is besieged, is under a siege of the Fulani herdsmen. So they are not going to their farms. If you go to the farm, you will likely be killed. So nobody wants to farm and die. So nobody is supplying food. So the rest of the country are suffering. And the government seems indifferent to this plight. It's a major problem. And the economy is in double-digit inflation. The economy, we've never had it so bad. We've never had it. This is disaster and calamity combined. We have never had it so bad. And the question is, what options do Christians have? Should we just pray? Should we pray and do something? If we are going to pray and do something, what is it that we're going to do? Some people believe that prayer alone is enough. Some people believe that speaking out on their own is enough. But some others believe that they have to put action to their faith, because faith without works is dead. They have to make their voice known. They have to speak out and act out so that the government will know that they are not doing well enough. And let me read something to you from Proverbs chapter 22, verse 8. Proverbs 22, verse 8. It says, "Whosoever sows injustice shall reap calamity, and the rod of fury which he wields shall be broken." Whosoever sows injustice shall reap calamity, and the rod of fury which the person holds or wields shall be broken. How will this scripture be fulfilled if we do not protest? Some people are saying, why don't you wait till the next election? Do your votes count? In the last election, did it count? I'm just asking, did it count? Was the result declared consistent with the aspirations of people? This is the issue. If we had confidence in the electoral process, there will be no need for this protest. There will be no need. But Nigerians have no confidence in the electoral process anymore. A situation where somebody who did not participate in primaries is made a senator, is that the process you want to depend on and stamped by the Supreme Court? A situation where even people who said they're organizing the election broke their own rules and yet declared the results from the broken rules, and the Supreme Court vetted it and approved it. What are the options available to Christians since your vote does not count? Rising up to use weapons is not there. It's not a possibility. So what are the options? Can't you engage in peaceful protests? The question is, if you engage in peaceful protests, what are the chances that you act and turn bloody by thugs of the pro-establishment? There are a lot of confusion going on. And today, I'm asking this question, open-ended, asking you as a Christian, what do you think? Do you think Christians should take part in this protest? Do you think it's Christian to participate in protests? We've looked at the Bible. What is your own thought? I have no answer. I want to hear your own answer. So tell us, what are your own thoughts? Should we participate in these protests? Yes or no?